Well, what an annoying race that was. Purely because that was a winning drive, a championship winning drive from Max Verstappen this weekend. Just gone in Brazil. This is the race review for the Sao Paulo Brazilian Grand Prix. I may not like him, and I may have been hoping on Lando capitalising on it against the odds for Verstappen, but he did everything he needed to this weekend. And not only that, he came from 17th to win, and to top it off, he did that in some of the most treacherous conditions we've seen in F1 for a while. Anyone who knows me knows I am not a Verstappen fan at all, but I hate to say it. This weekend could be the one that got both hands firmly on his fourth World Drivers' Championship. So let's get into it, shall we? Grab yourselves a brew. This could take a while because it was quite an eventful weekend, or if you are on Stroll, it did not take a while at all. Poor guy was off before the race had even started. He somehow had a weird snap on hitting the brakes on the warm-up lap, which, to be fair to him, it was a weird snap, and it's not something you can completely put down to the driver's fault, but it sent him careering towards the barrier. That bit is fair enough. Could have happened to any unlucky driver in those conditions, because, let's face it, the conditions were horrid. This weekend saw us face a red flag in almost every single session, I think, if I remember rightly. The thing he did next, though, is aging terribly. He manages to get himself going again and drives straight into the bloody gravel trap and gets himself beached, ending his race before it's even begun. Like, how does nothing in his head ring any alarm bells and tell him, it's a bad idea, that, mate? Try doing a 180 instead of driving through the gravel trap. Clue is in the name once, it's a gravel trap. Trap. Jesus. So yeah, before the race even started, we were down to 19 cars. And this ended up creating the next situation of an abandoned start. Excuse me. Which, for me here, the FIA were the ones in the wrong. For all 20 drivers to move off and then the top 4 receive a monetary fine for breaking start procedures, the FIA need to be more clear on what the abandoned start means. Also, I don't see why it couldn't have been just an extra formation lap. Some will say Max and a couple of others did the right thing and stayed still, but they didn't. In the end, even he and the others moved off under the red flashing light still. So, for me, if you find the top 4, you have to find the entire grid. There's no if or buts about it. You can't have one punishment for the 4 of them and the rest of the grid get away with it. They still all moved off. But I think it's more of a very bad communication error from the FIA. They should have claimed fault for that and said they will do better in the future to be more clear on starting procedures. Top 4 getting fined is a strange choice, but I'm just glad that the Steward's decision didn't alter any outcomes of the race, because that would be a shame. But for me, the FIA should be admitting fault there and saying, look, it's not clear what we meant. There was red flashing lights and abandoned start, because I'm sure in previous races when it says abandoned start, they've done formation laps again. Maybe that's where the confusion lies, but yeah, Max and a few others, João and Bottas, were at the back staying still, but in the end, the lights were still flashing red and they still moved off. If they really wanted to do the right thing, it was just to stay still. So the entire grid either needs money fines or the FIA needs to say it was our fault. So after all that, now let's finally talk about the race, shall we? And it was a race where Lando, yet again, managed to actually qualify in pole position, but he lost it in the first sector, in the first corner. And I know some of you will say it's being harsh, it was terrible conditions, but the fact of the matter is, if you are going to win a World Drivers title, that excuse is not good enough. This weekend, Lando should have been on it. We should be saying, nice try, Max, but Lando sealed it this time and increased that gap He should have been leading from turn 1 and building a gap. Losing places like this at the start of a Grand Prix is going to be one of his biggest downfalls if he doesn't get it sorted. People say in this sport you make your own luck, and it is so true. If Lando had maintained pole position, it gives him the power then to build a lead, but not also that, to build the race. To then wait out for a safety car, or to save his tyres, it enables him to alter the race how he chooses, ultimately to a point. But because Russell got P1 in the first corner from a better second phase of his getaway, it meant that he spent his first half of the race sitting behind Russell and losing countless amounts of time, because we all know the McLaren is faster than the Mercedes. And he was unable to overtake and unable to build a gap, which all in all helped Max to facilitate his comeback. Which, like I say, if you want to be if you want to be winning world championships, you need to capitalise on golden moments like this. Because straight from the start, Max was on the attack. He got held up a little bit by Lewis. He was doing some good defending, but that was short-lived, as Lewis's car this weekend was disgracefully bad. The difference between Lewis and George was sadly night and day. Lewis's car just not performing anywhere near like we've seen. He couldn't get the power down, understeering off track, no grip where it mattered, unable to trust the car and the braking point, running wide, locking up. Not sure what they did to the car setup. Well, setup wise, or maybe if it was driver error. Not all of it would have been driver error, but it was just tragic. Which is a shame, because it was a big weekend, you could argue, for us. He is, of course, an honorary citizen of Brazil, and this weekend was a little more special as he drove Ayrton Senna's McLaren around Sao Paulo. And my God, it was good to hear that engine. A proper engine for a change. That is what I grew up listening to and loving. It's so good to hear that scream of a proper F1 engine on a track again. The crowd loved it as well. And I'm pretty sure he stalled it twice, which I'm not letting him live that down. We don't let our mates and Tesco car park live it down, so we're not letting him live it down. But I know they're a bit harder to drive and the clutch is quite heavy. You need to put on an insane amount of revs just to get the car going, but it sounded amazing. And it's also good to see that kind of highlights the talent for the heel and toe and things like that. It's I wasn't sure it was actually going to happen, because I thought with how bad the weather was, we might not actually be blessed in seeing it this weekend, but it was great to see. And I also saw a quote that someone was saying in a few years, there'll be a young talent driving Lewis Hamilton's car in a very similar situation, which you couldn't help but think it was so true. I mean, I hope it's not in the sense of where Lewis Hamilton has died before his time, but in a sense, you can't help but feel like it is so true. But focusing back on the race, if I remember rightly, one of our first offs was our little Mexican hero, Checo. He gave us a nice little pirouette in the second sector to stand into the back in 18th position. At this point, I'm pretty sure Max had made up 7 places by now as well. And it's not surprising, because his confidence on his brakes was phenomenal. He was able to brake exactly where he needed to, and he had so much trust in the car that it was going to stop where he wanted it to. It was insane to watch. He had another place in the bag before the other guy even knew what was happening. No argument about it. Sadly, this weekend was Max's. He was driving on another level, and it was very, very annoying to watch as a Lewis fan. But, as I said, this is the kind of race he needed to seal his grip on the world title this weekend. And it was also very sort of refreshing to see a Max who's not angry all the time, shouting at his team all the time, and was just relishing in the conditions, loving the racing, making amazing overtakes and driving amazing to not only win, but to build a gap at the front and win by a mile. But we fast forward a couple of laps, and our friend sitting under the weather in a hotel room, K-Mag, he had, was it Oliver Behrman sitting in for him? He got a penalty for colliding with Franco Colapinto, which makes No sense to me at all. He spun himself out, lost out on a lot of time. Franco carried on with no loss to the time at all. But yeah, Oliver gets a 10-second penalty. No sense at all in that. It was another baffling decision made by the stewards that are clearly drinking when they watch the race. It's baffling. A 10-second penalty for him spinning himself out and his opponent that he tried to overtake on carries on going. It could have been a 5-second penalty as well. There was no time lost for his opponent there. I have no idea what he was thinking. But shortly onwards, find ourselves to lap 28, where the McLaren make their fatal mess up in strategy. That, you can argue, cost Lando any chance of getting a podium. Well, that and his own driving also cost him, but we'll come back to that in a little while. The camera cuts to a Haas in the gravel. And no, I don't think it wasn't the gravel, was it? But it was the Hulkenberg. He was beached on the different level of the tarmac, that was it. And the camera cuts back after a few seconds of initially showing this, and we see Nico has got going again. And McLaren, unbeknownst to anyone, still call Lando into the pits. Which is almost as bad as FIA just giving penalties out left, right, and centre for no reason. As soon as I saw the Haas was moving again, I was expecting McLaren to cancel the call in. But they didn't. They just kept Lando coming into the box. And this meant that he lost track position now to the unknown red flag, which is just around the corner. Of course, they wouldn't have known this, but it was a bad call to bring him in. One that Russell was very adamant on. He said numerous times before pitting that he should stay out as it's going to get red flagged from being too wet. And that's exactly what happened as Franco finds the wall and a heavy shunt producing the red. Now, if McLaren had kept Lando out, or if Mercedes had kept Russell out, he would still be in first place and they would have been able to change tyres under the red flag. And that brings me to the subject that I have argued over a lot over the years, and that's the free tyre change under a red flag. And I think, especially with all the rules that we have in F1 to govern everything, I think it's completely stupid that a red flag allows all the teams now just to put any tyres on the car that they see fit. It's ridiculous. A red flag should pause the race. They shouldn't be allowed to change tyres. They should go back out on the tyres they came in on. That way, when they go back out, the race is resumed. Now, a lot of you are going to say, but Jono, what about if they have a puncture? Obviously, if they had a puncture, then he's changing, but that's different. That comes under the damage rule that they have. So if you have a puncture, you have a damaged tyre. So you can change it for a like-for-like part. Obviously, though, when you're changing tyres, all four need changing. It's like a front wing. If you come into the pits with a front wing that's damaged, you change it for a like-for-like part so that you go out with a nice new wing. Because you can't go back onto the track with any dangerous parts. So if you needed to pit, the red flag came out, that's unlucky, but they should go back out and then pit once the race has begun again. A red flag should not allow anyone to gain an advantage in the pits from having a free choice of tyres. This obviously meant that Alpine team fell into a world of luck, and that's awesome for them, don't get me wrong, I'm really happy for them because that's part and part of the parcel, isn't it? Even though I disagree with the rule, it is what it is. And for them to look into first and second at the time, that's great. And also Max fell into some luck. But as I said before, you make your own luck, and his amazing start with the great overtakes that he made were all ingredients in the recipe that got him in that win. So he didn't just look into third place at that time. I think it was third or fourth. But his 7 overtakes in lap 1 and his constant pushing and catching were all part of the mixture that got him to that. So when that red flag came out, it was his great driving up until that point that got him into that position. And speaking of things I don't agree with, surprisingly under the red flag, Hulkenberg gets a black flag, which was an incredibly harsh call from the FIA, I think. If any of the if anything, the stewards that pushed. So if any of you don't know, Hulkenberg got a red flag because 4 stewards. If you remember, I said his car was stuck on 2 different uneven parts of the tarmac because the cars are that low. It was just beached. So 4 stewards just pushed his car back a little bit. That's it. And he got black flagged for that and was removed from the race because those 4 stewards gave him a nudge. But it's a bit unfair because he was in the runoff for a mid to high speed corner where it's very likely in that torrential rainfall another person could slide into him. And also, it's not like they grabbed shovels and started digging him out. It's not like he was in the gravel trap and they got planks of wood and shovels and pulled him out of a tow bar, and he was just stuck on a different level of tarmac. His car had no damage. He didn't get out either. It was a harsh black flag for me, that. Haas were unfair in that one. Although it was funny hearing Ted Kravitz talk about it as Nico was sat chilling just a few feet away from him with absolutely no clue, while Karun Chandok and Crofty tease him and say he should go over there and tell him. That was quite funny. But if anything, you should reprimand the stewards. Like, for me, there was no evidence that the driver asked him to do that. From what we see, there may be, but I don't know. But reprimand the stewards. The car technically wasn't stuck. It didn't need craning out. So I think it was very, very unfair. But once it finally did restart, Ocon got us restarted, and that was pretty good restart from Ocon, you know. Caught everyone out, and he managed to keep the charge of Verstappen behind. The Alpines had a sterling weekend. Saying that though, the one person who should be having a sterling weekend was Lando, and he found himself battling for 5th as he careered wide into turn 1. I know it sounds harsh, but it's yet another mistake which he didn't need if he wanted this championship to stay in his grasp. Everything from this weekend can come down to mistakes that either the team or him made, and it's things like that that lost Lewis Hamilton the championship by 1 point. It's things like that that lose you a championship from 5 points, where they could have easily been made up in other races. We're running out of races now as well, so he really, really can't afford to leave points on the shelf. And that gap between him and Max has now risen to 62 or 61 points, if I remember rightly. So he's made his job even harder now for these last 3 races where there's 75 points up for grabs. And he ideally needs a DNF from Max, and he's not going to get it. Ollie Bear had a bit of a nightmare too, though. Before the race even got restarted, when Ocon was controlling the pack, you could see him careering over the grass as he, I think, went wide or even got caught out by the people going slower in front of him. But for me, it felt like a young trap trying to prove himself, just pushing a bit too much at the wrong times. He sent himself spinning behind the Ferrari. See, it's those kind of actions though that make me think he's got a bright future ahead of him, but it was just his inexperience showing. So pushing like he was on a dry track behind the Ferrari, you can't push like that in the wet weather. Your downforce is being ruined by all of the water. You're going too slow for your downforce to work the same as on a dry track. So when he was falling that closely to the Ferrari, he was just asking to be sent off straight towards the barriers. And eventually that's what happened, but luckily he didn't meet the barriers. You can't follow the Ferrari like he was doing and try and overtake the rear end. Is going to catch up at some point. It's sending him spinning, but the fate of which would later be Carlos Sainz a couple of hours later as he finds the barriers. And for Carlos Sainz, it was not the greatest weekend for him anyway. He did try and get it running again though, which you can commend him for, but the suspension was too bad for damage for him to carry on. That prompted the second restart for Esteban. Only this time, Max was all over him and overtook him straight into turn one. Once again, showing off how confident he is on the brakes. But this was where Lando goes straight off the track and drops from 5th to 7th. Eventually, Piastri and Lando swap positions thanks to team orders, but it turns out they'll be nowhere near enough to make up for anything as Max brings it home in P1. And Lando finishes in P6. When you look at the beginning of the race and you saw that Lando was in P1 and Max was in P17, that's not the result we should be reading out. He had an incredible chance to do some damage to Max's lead in the championship, and it's been a terrible, terrible weekend for his championship hopes, and definitely one to forget. I have no idea if it's the pressure getting to him or what, but I think this weekend alone is one that tipped the scales in Max's favour, and Lando is going to need a miracle now if he has any chance of winning the World Drivers' Championship. I feel like the last few races, we've seen a very different side to Lando, creeping in a little bit. He's a bit more impatient in the media pen, a bit more impatient with interviews. His frustration is starting to show. I think it's sort of showing how difficult it is to race at the top and how difficult it is to live a life where everything is under scrutiny. And what I mean by that is, in 2021, everything that Max and Lewis did was multiplied by 1,000 from all the headlines, all the media, and everything. Even Sky Sports, BBC Sport, your foreign sport channels, whatever they are, were all looking for something juicy to put on their site. So anything that happened, they would try and dramatise it. And it's the same with Lando and Max. Lando's the closest challenger to him, and they're trying to do everything they can to get a story out of it. And I feel like he's not enjoying that. And it's a shame because we all want a close battle. But I'm not sure if Lando maybe mentally has what it takes this year to stick with it, or stick it to him. I think he's going to need a lot of luck now if he has any chance of catching up to Max points wise. I think it's safe to say after that drive, Max will be a 4-time world champion by the end of the season. He keeps this momentum up. He's got it in the bag already. Brazil was the pivotal point this year where he officially put his name on that World Drivers title. And if it had gone Lando's way, that would have been a massive confidence boost. It had all the mix-ins to go his way, but whether it was pressure or what that got to him, it was just something that didn't allow it to go his way. I think he definitely at the start of the season didn't think he was going to be in a championship battle. So maybe mentally he wasn't prepared for it. And then, like it or not, he is in that position now. Maybe he's maturity-wise a little bit too young to deal with everything that comes with it, all the limelight, and because it's not easy. And you've got to perform at the top of your game, race in and race out, and these little mistakes that keep happening, like losing P1 in the first corner after qualifying pole position, makes all your work pointless. You may as well qualify P2, do your best to get second place, and then lose it to P3. Pole position is one of the most important things at some tracks for a reason, especially at Brazil, because you can defend that inside line. So little mistakes like this need to be knocked on the head. He's throwing away points. Helmut Marko may have a point when he said that if Lewis was in the McLaren, the championship would have been won by now, or at least won this year by Lewis. But that's also unfair to say, as it's sort of trying to create situations that never will happen, and it's a bit damning to Lando on his part. But the point stands. Going wide on the race restart, dropping down to 7th, that's crucial mistakes. You need to, like we saw with Max at the original race start, he didn't try anything dangerous on the inside. He kept it patient on the outside, knew the track layout, held it on the inside for the next corner, overtook some on the straight, 7 places made up. I just think there's a lot of maturity to come from Lando yet, and whether we will see that is still to be known, but I think it's too late this year. Next year, maybe a better year for them, but that all depends on what kind of car McLaren are bringing to the table. If they bring a car similar to this year, then that's great, but I personally don't think Red Bull will be as strong next year, as they were still developing their car as of 1 race ago, or 2 races ago. Usually at this point in the season, teams are focused on next year already. So it's very interesting that there was a few teams actually that are still developing their car so late into the season. So we could see a bit of a whip turned upside down table next year. You might have Haas that are good 3/4 pack contenders, so like your 4th, 5th, and 6th place contenders. But one thing that I do like is they were calling it the $50 million race, because now if Alpine stay in the position that they earned this weekend from their double podium place, that will earn them £50 million or dollars in prize money. And that is insane to think about, but also highlights how important every race is in this season. Because that puts every other team now in the scope, not just to try and get any points they can, but also now to try and beat them to get that place back, because that's then more money for Haas. But $50 million can stretch a long way when you're developing a car as well. And Alpine have been nowhere this year. So for them, that is a huge result. And apart from Max's amazing drive, that is going to be one of the big headlines from this race. But sadly, Max did drive amazing, and it's very annoying to say that. I would much rather he'd have spun off, stayed in the 17th and Lando had won, but it was quite nice to see Max driving so well. The confidence he had on the brakes into some of the corners, especially turn 1, he was able to brake so much later than everybody else, and the car just took it. It was great to see. That's what we want, though. We don't want shouting down the mic at your team and blaming the team for something. We just want driving. And it's one of the reasons why I love the Brazilian Grand Prix. I miss when the Brazilian Grand Prix was the last race of the season. It was so good. It always brings us a great race. And this weekend was no exception. It was amazing. I loved every second. It was eventful from the start to the finish. It's been a while, it feels like, since we've had a race like that, but definitely have some more like that. It's Vegas next, and I think it's a 2-week break for Vegas, unfortunately. We're having so many breaks towards the end of the season. It's a good track, Vegas. It's a street track, so there's no forgiveness. If anybody runs wide, they're running wide into a wall. So we may see a safety car again. I personally think it's going to be a fight between the McLaren and the Ferraris for pole position. Max might struggle a bit here because it's straight line speed. Williams, though, infamously have a good straight line speed car, so we could see a surprise result from Williams. If not in the top 8, at least higher than what they're usually finishing at. So I expect to see good things from William and Haas at the Vegas Grand Prix. And I look forward to finding out. That's going to do it for this episode, so take care.